act of war, pretty much. And the population and the public was pretty hysterical for, a couple of weeks.
Let me ask you about the government of Russia's reaction to that. This is something I know I really need to learn a lot more about, but there's a couple of guys who always post the same comment over and over again on the anti-war radio blog entry, archive entries, and which is that when America takes this first strike posture, that means that Russia has to take a launch on warning posture, which means that if Norway launches a satellite into space and their computer reads it wrong, goodbye Austin, Texas.
Yeah, in theory it should be that way. The only thing that I would say that gives me a bit of comfort is that, ideologically, our two systems, our two governments are not so, diametrically opposed as they were before. I mean, Russia is still essentially a capitalist, a variation on kind of capitalist dictatorship.
Well, and we're becoming a lot more like Russia here too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to be honest, there are more similarities than should make any of us comfortable. And in fact, the horrible reality is we were part of what we helped put Putin into power. I think a lot of our own oligarchical interests and sort of thought he would be our Pinochet, and there was a lot of talk about how we needed a Pinochet because Yeltsin was faltering so badly. We turned against him because he turned out to be not our Pinochet, but Russia's Pinochet. He wasn't our bastard, he was their own bastard, and that's why we really turned against him. So, but to get back to your point, that is certainly a danger. I don't think fingers are on the trigger quite as, ready to strike as they used to be, and maybe I'm just in a false sense of security, but that danger is there, but it's just not the same as under the Soviet time, I think.
Yeah.
Plus, I'm not really sure how much the Russians even trust their own equipment, and to allow something like that to happen.
Yeah, well, I hope that's right, and believe me, I would much rather have that same false sense of security. That's why I don't watch documentaries about meat packing facilities, you know what I mean? I'd just rather pretend. On the other hand, it's got me thinking about, I forgot what it was called, the Schlieffen Plan or whatever, before World War I in Germany, where if Russia attacks us, we invade France, and it was just, in the form of the bureaucracy. If this happens, that's the reaction kind of thing. And that's what really scares me is that, there's some signature on a clipboard that says launch on warning, and that's going to be what counts at the end,
I think there's definitely that danger. And people think that Putin has this incredible hold, like nothing happens, nothing moves in the country without him lifting a finger or signing an order, which is just not true. The bureaucracy does operate pretty autonomously from Putin, and once in a while he sort of, stomps in the room and shakes things up. And that's a really good point. And on top of that, I think, his generals, as was evidenced with the move he made to allow us into the Central Asian bases, his generals and the people in the military and in the security services are far more anti-American and aggrieved and bellicose than Putin is. There's no doubt about that. And even Khodorkovsky, the Yukos oligarch who's in Siberia in jail, he wrote from jail that Putin is more liberal than 70% of the country. And some people took that to mean that, Khodorkovsky had been broken or was trying to suck up to Putin, but I don't think so. I think it's true. I think Putin he's probably a bit less liberal now than he was a couple of years ago, especially after we were backing this, Garry Kasparov's opposition to him. I think that radicalized him to a new level.
Well, and Garry Kasparov was allies with these guys who, I swear, they're straight out of The Simpsons, the commie Nazis, right? The National Bolsheviks.
Yeah, but, I should add, Edward Limonov, the head of the National Bolsheviks, he's one of my favorite writers, and I was reading his book, before I even moved to Russia years ago. He also wrote for the Exile before our newspaper was closed down. He used to write for us.
Really?
Yeah, he wrote regular columns, and in fact, I think the fact that he wrote for us was one of the reasons why I think my newspaper got in trouble got cited with potential extremism. And, he is very radical and very extreme, and it is very odd that, the neocons and the NED would be backing the National Bolsheviks in Russia. It's very odd. But, Russia is not what we want it to be. We want Russia, we kind of have this script where there are good, decent, middle-class, pro-American people just waiting, ready to lay down their lives to have in order to bring about this glorious Walmart cubicle future. And we've seen that to some degree in Eastern European countries. And we think sort of like in the movie Full Metal Jacket, we think inside of every, name of nationality here, there's an American trying to get out. Mm-hmm. And the reality is in Russia, there isn't an American trying to get out. Russia is such a completely different culture with a different history. And, if there's going to be a revolution there, it's not going to be some kind of pro-American, neocon, pro-Clinton, Tony Blair type of leadership. It could be a national Bolshevik regime, much more. I can imagine that much more easily than I can imagine a liberal democratic regime there.
Well, please forgive me for getting all scorpions and winds of change and things on you here, but what if, let's do like the counterfactual history. Let's say that after the fall of the Soviet Union, rather than pretending to give them a hand to help them up, but in fact just holding them there so we can kick them while they're down, what if we had actually tried to say, now listen, here's the best way, what you ought to do is sell shares of stocks to everybody and all these companies and really create a market economy there, and we had tried to really be friends with them. How different could it have been,
That's a great question. I mean, obviously we'll never know, but it could not have been worse. What we did was the absolute worst thing to ensure that the Russians are going to distrust us, distrust liberal democracy and market capitalism for at least a generation. We were with the absolute bad guys, and we pushed it down the narrowest, worst path possible for Russians.
I even remember at the time
our short-term needs, very, very short-term political and greed needs, but we led them down the absolute worst path, and we were very instrumental in it. I mean, in Gorbachev's last year or two, we pretty much shifted policy and stopped helping him, stopped supporting him, threw our weight behind this group of radical young reformers who were big fans of Pinochet and shock therapy, and we funded them through USAID and other vehicles. We funded these guys, at a time when $50 million went a long way, and we made their careers. And that group, it was called the St. Petersburg Clan, that group of radical reformers who were all enthralled by Pinochet and shock therapy and who all even traveled to Chile at that time, that's the group that Putin eventually came out of.
Yeah, I remember, I believe, maybe I read this later, but the way I remember it, I think it was even when I was a kid, actually, during the fall of the Soviet Union, watching it on TV with my dad, and not long after that, hearing a reference to one of the former Soviet leaders saying, well, we want to look at your Constitution and try to copy the American Constitution. And that the Americans said, oh, no, you don't. That's the worst thing you want to do. Oh, it's a terrible, ineffective thing. You don't want that.
Yeah, because we wanted to control the place. That's why. And I think we thought if they had a constitution like ours, they might have a tough time controlling it. I mean, we made so many blunders. First, by pushing the most radical privatization program. I mean, this goes back to Larry Summers and that whole insane Ayn Rand neoliberal ideology that you kind of create, that you don't spread the wealth and opportunity in that situation. Instead, you create a tiny class of Ubermenschen, of oligarchs, who then will make it in their interest, who then will have an interest in maintaining the status quo, which at the time we thought the status quo was pro-American government, which will be good for business. And so we were very instrumental in steering Russia towards this kind of extreme shock therapy oligarchical economy. And that's what the battle between